Hello, everyone, and welcome to the podcast. You know me. My name is Andy Shepherd. I'm the clinical lead here at ReadyCare, and today I'm going to be talking about something very close to my heart that I am really, really interested in over the past kind of number of years in terms of the research around it, and that is Alzheimer's disease and how a ketogenic diet and supplements like medium chain triglycerides, caprylic acid, coconut oil, and so on can potentially provide an alternative fuel source and kind of save the dying brain, for want of a better expression. So let me just share a couple of slides here and we get started. Okay, first of all, just a little breakdown of how big of a problem Alzheimer's is. You know, we tend to think of Alzheimer's as being something that only affects elderly people and it's towards the end of life and it's a devastating illness. But you know, we kind of minimize the extent to which we see in terms of its prevalence. There's about 60 million people have dementia, and the number is protected. As dementia, Alzheimer's are kind of interchangeable terms, cognitive impairment, and so on. And the number is projected to rise to 75 million, and as far as 130 million by 2050. Even 2030, in a couple of years' time, 6-7 years' time, 75 million is what they reckon. So there's currently no cure for Alzheimer's, and drug treatments don't work. Now, that sounds like a very strong statement, but they don't. I mean, the most promising drug for Alzheimer's was a drug called Aduhelm. And what Aduhelm did, I'll come back to the camera actually, was they looked at Aduhelm as a real promising drug. It was what's known as an MAB, a monoclonal antibody. You may have heard of those as treatments for COVID, actually, at one stage they were effective. So monoclonal antibodies can go to a particular cell, a particular region, and just attack that and kind of dampen down the inflammation and help the issue there. The monoclonal antibodies in the case of Alzheimer's, what they did was they targeted the beta amyloid plaques that are associated with Alzheimer's. And I say associated because it's not clear that they cause it. So the trials are very promising. Aduhelm showed that it reduced down the beta amyloid plaques. And then the huge surprise and shocker was that it made no difference to the outcomes in terms of Alzheimer's. So I might do a separate video on this, but the idea that Alzheimer's disease is a disease that's caused by and just characterized by beta amyloid protein buildup in the brain, and that's the problem, doesn't appear to be the case, because when you remove all of that plaque with the likes of these newer treatments like Aduhelm, it didn't make any difference in terms of the outcomes or longevity or prevent anything bad happening from the patients. So it did reduce the beta amyloid plaques in the brain, but it didn't help the Alzheimer's. Really important differentiation between those two things. So what's really interesting is that this would imply that there's something else going on and would actually feed into the insulin resistance theory about Alzheimer's, that it's essentially another expression of high blood sugar levels, which is why a lot of researchers have in recent years referred to Alzheimer's as type 3 diabetes in the brain. So removing the beta amyloid plaques didn't help. And this feeds into the idea that Alzheimer's disease is closely related to blood sugar control. So when your blood sugar levels go up, you become insulin resistant. And this is going to be a real reductionist way of looking at it, but it's just for the purpose of explaining what I'm talking about at a higher level, it's probably useful. So Alzheimer's disease appears to be insulin resistance in the brain. So the brain starting to lose its ability to use glucose or carbohydrate as a fuel source, in the same way as type 2 diabetes is insulin resistance of the pancreas. The pancreas not being able to allow the body to efficiently uptake and use glucose. This is just a little bit about the molecular problem, but basically where you have two different fuel sources that your body can use that go through something called the Krebs cycle to make ATP, which is energy, adenosine triphosphate. So glucose undergoes what's known as glycolysis and produces oxidative metabolism. So basically it's broken down and used as a form of energy. Now, in Alzheimer's, there's an inability for the body to use glucose as a fuel source. This is really important. So Alzheimer's is characterized by something known as GLUT4 deficiency, meaning that it can't use glucose or sugar as a fuel source. Can't use carbs, can't use glucose, sugar. They're all basically different versions of the same thing, which is glucose. But it retains the ability to use ketones as an energy source. So there's been studies recently, and I'll show you some of these in a minute, that have shown that If you do nothing else other than feed patients who have Alzheimer's what are known as MCTs, medium chain triglycerides, which are basically fatty acids in a capsule form or liquid form for that matter, that the brain still has the ability to use that, and their cognitive abilities, their focus, short-term, long-term potentiation, and various different markers for cognitive focus or cognitive scores will go up. So just as a little breakdown of kind of Alzheimer's as a metabolic disease, this is really interesting. The brain is really metabolic. So anytime you have a deficiency in your metabolism, so for example, you have the inability to use glucose, the brain suffers immediately, and there's cell death, there's energy death and cell death. And you see this if you do PET scans of people. So basically, you feed someone a glucose drink, and you do a PET scan of the brain in Alzheimer's. The areas of the brain that light up when the body or the brain is using glucose as a fuel source are dampened down. They're a totally different color. You'll see the red areas there, whereas it'll light up in green in somebody who doesn't have Alzheimer's. So it's very clear that this is an energy metabolism issue in the brain, or at least that is characterized by it. Now, normally the brain relies almost exclusively on glucose, but in the case of Alzheimer's, it's struggling to use that glucose. So the idea is that if you can teach the body to use fat as an energy source, which we can through a process known as fat adaptation or becoming fat adapted, keto adaptation and so on, in times of low glucose, ketones can be used instead. And that would infer a potential ability to use a different fuel source and for brain function to return or at least improve, which to date the medication can't do. So ketone bodies are actually the brain's preferred fuel source. Now, they're normally produced if you have a very low glucose in your bloodstream, so if you become fat adapted. This is why people in remote tribes around the world have no problem with energy or cognitive focus, even though they don't eat much, if any, carbohydrate in some of them. For example, the Canadian Inuits and the Maasai tribe. And they tend to have a really good cognitive focus, mental health, energy levels, disease prevention, and so on. So these are some of the studies that show ketogenic supplementation or ketogenic diet that's been low carb, high fat for Alzheimer's disease. And if you look at the outcomes here, improvements in performance and quality of life, improved executive function and brain metabolism, improvements in memory, brain metabolism, CSF biomarkers. CSF is just cerebral spinal fluid. Improvements in cognition, memory, executive function, language. Really, really promising stuff. And this is, if you put this side by side, the ketogenic diet or the keto type supplements like MCTs, this is in stark contrast to the pharmacological trials that show little or no benefit. Some of them actually are deleterious outcomes, things like brain bleeds and strokes and hemorrhages and that sort of stuff as well. So just a quick one today, guys. I just wanted to kind of touch on the improvements that potentially we can expect to see over the coming years. It's a really promising treatment. Personally, and this is just my own personal opinion, if someone close to me was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, I would be putting that person on, and I can do this because it's my background and I could professionally supervise them. I would be at least encouraging and helping to implement a low carb whole food diet for that particular person. Because the trials and at least the mechanisms are all in place to indicate that that would be a potentially beneficial outcome. And who knows how much more it'll be than potentially beneficial, but it looks very, very promising. Guys, thanks for your time. We will see you next week and take care of yourselves. Bye-bye, everyone.